Banks actually didn't have to redeem in gold. The Treasury had to redeem in gold. So once again, you had the U.S. Treasury on the hook as the ultimate surety of this system. Well, the system was sold on the basis that this was scientific management of currency. We would no longer have depressions. We would no longer have stringencies. We would no longer have inflations. All of that stuff that we had had in the 19th century would be gone. 20 years later, the greatest depression the world had ever seen. Okay. Now, what's fascinating here is, I'm going to have to stop in a moment, so I'm just going to tell you about Franklin Roosevelt. Here Franklin Roosevelt comes in, and what he wanted to do was to raise prices. That was the theory of the New Deal, right? Prices are being driven down by the Depression, and we need to raise prices, so we're going to kill pigs and pour milk in the street and do all this other stuff to raise prices. And one of the ways he wanted to raise prices was to depreciate the value of the gold currency. The gold dollar, the dollar of actually the Coinage Act of 1900, which had finally settled on this gold unit. He wanted to depreciate that value. And he did that how? He did that by seizing all the gold from the American people and then simply putting an arbitrary value on gold from day to day until he came up to $35 an ounce. And you ought to read how he did that. I mean, his Morgenthau, Henry Morgenthau, Secretary of the Treasury, sometimes coming into Roosevelt while Roosevelt's lying in bed, and they just say, well, how much are we going to put it up today, Henry? Oh, how about 25 cents more? Okay, we'll just do that. It's completely arbitrary. Right? Well, remember how I told you how the value of currency was, money was supposed to be set, right? Well, the ratio between gold and silver in the 30s never went below 50 to 1. So if Roosevelt had simply come in, if I had been Roosevelt's advisor, I would have said, Franklin, here's all we have to do. We have the wrong ratio between silver and gold at 16 to 1. If we put in the correct ratio, let's say at 51 to 1, that will effectively depreciate the value of the gold coinage versus silver, and we'll get what you want constitutionally. And we won't have to seize the gold from the American people, and we won't have to prohibit gold clause contracts, and we won't have to have this huge political brouhaha if we would just follow the Constitution. Oh, and by the way, we can depreciate it far more than Congress is willing to let you depreciate it now. They're only willing to let you depreciate it 60%. We can depreciate it 76%. So it really would have been valuable if Franklin Roosevelt and Henry Morgenthau and the people around them had known a little bit, just a little bit, about the constitutional principles of money. So where are we today? Well, the answer where we are today is we have an irredeemable paper currency, actually electronic currency, because most of it is just generated on account books, electronic account books, right? An irredeemable paper currency coming out of a private banking cartel for which the American people are on the hook in some kind of bailouts, because of course the bank cartel comes to us and says, oh, we've made terrible mistakes, we'll admit that, and now they may be fatal to the economy if you don't bail us out. And of course they'll be worse next year, and you can bail us out next year and they'll be worse. I mean, right, this thing just perpetuates. So this is the system we have now. And I would suggest that this is even worse than the worst events that occurred under the colonial and state systems prior to the Constitution. Because there is absolutely no control on this system whatsoever, except for one. Actually, there are two, because the states can take action. You're going to see, I think, in the next couple of years, action being taken by the states to deal with alternative currencies. Section 30 of the Federal Reserve Act. You know what Section 30 of the Federal Reserve Act does? Section 30 of the Federal Reserve Act, Congress retains the right to alter, amend, or repeal the legislation at any time. And why is that even there? I mean, you know, most of the statutes you people see, there's no provision like that that says Congress retains the right to repeal this. Well, of course Congress has the right to repeal it, because they recognize that those banks were private entities, and by creating this charter and giving them these powers, some smart lawyer in the future might come along and say, wait a minute, you can't take these away because you've made a contract with us. And actually the Supreme Court said that a long time ago, that if the legislature makes this kind of an arrangement, it may be a contractual arrangement, and it cannot be rescinded. So Congress put this in. It's also put in the Social Security Act, by the way. Railroad Retirement Act. There are a number of these provisions where Congress recognized it might have a problem in changing the terms of the deal, and so it put that kind of language in there. Well, that means the Federal Reserve System, the Federal Reserve note, is what John Exer, now deceased, pretty famous banker, called it. It's an IOU nothing currency in the truest sense of the word. The banks don't owe you anything, and Congress can turn around and tell you it owes you nothing too. So I would suggest that you people, and the people you talk to, should begin thinking about just what we're going to do to correct this situation before the roof falls in. Now, I'll take whatever questions you have. Oh, well, the first question, of course, is how long, right? How long before the roof falls in? Well, I don't predict such things, but I'm willing to predict this. It will not be a depressionary phenomenon. It will be a hyperinflationary phenomenon. It won't necessarily start in this country, it could start in Europe, but it will be a hyperinflationary phenomenon. What I mean by that is 50% depreciation per month, minimum. And you know what's come out of every hyperinflationary phenomenon, at least in my knowledge in the world, except for one, because we had one, of course, in the time of the War of Independence. Except for that one, some kind of police-state dictatorial system, always. Because the chaos that's generated by that event, especially at this time, you have the most complicated price structure in the history of the world. It depends entirely on essentially a stable monetary unit of some kind. When you blow that monetary unit out, what happens? The price structure collapses. You go to barter? How do you go to barter? What are the number of products out there? How do you settle on a product or a series of products, a small number of products, to be used as the bartering medium? Essentially impossibility. So we're looking at an unprecedented situation. If this currency system goes into hyperinflation, you're going to have an economic collapse. The world just, I mean, you can't contemplate what it's going to be like. That's why I say somebody has got to begin to think about what will be the alternative currency if this one goes down. And don't tell me this one won't go down. It's already gone down once. 1932. Well, 1930 to 1932, I mean, a period of time. It's already gone down once. And that was when it was on a 40% gold reserve, thank you very much. 40% behind the notes and 35% behind the demand deposits at the Federal Reserve regional banks. And that wasn't enough. Now you have no reserve. So this is like the Titanic. Right? I mean, the Titanic had the one possibility that someone might have gotten there in time. There's nobody coming to help us. It's going to have to be done, sorry to say, right here. Because the system is now essentially out of control. And I think you see that especially in Europe now. I've been watching the Italian situation now, and you can smell the panic coming over the internet from this. Now I know Italians, you know, they're kind of voluble and so forth. These are not Italians that are the ones who are panicking. I think most of them are Germans, actually. But you can really, you can smell it coming out of Europe. And who's going to bail them out? Do we have a guess as to who's going to do that? Huh? It's going to be Mr. Bernanke. Because they cannot face, and I think correctly so, they cannot face the consequences of a depression. Can you imagine what a 1930s style depression in this country would be like? That's what they don't want to have happen. And the one tool that they have that they think can prevent that in the short term is what? Quantitative easing, inflation, generating money, generating paper currency, bills of credit, bills of discredit, because they're not going to be paid, right? Bills of discredit. We keep generating this stuff, and we hope that something will happen, right? We're playing for time financially. But I think it was Machiavelli who said, that's a fallacy, because time brings all things, bad as well as good. And the only solution here, I think, is to come up with an alternative currency. And a lot of people have proposed exactly how to do this. This isn't something that's difficult. It's on-the-shelf technology. We could set this thing up in 30, 60 days after the statute was passed. An alternative sound currency based on silver and gold. Start using that in the marketplace. Start transitioning the governments into using it for purposes of taxation and spending. And let the banks figure out how to solve their own problem. Because we can't figure it out. There's a problem of what's called rational economic calculation, which is the problem of all central planning. There is no way to figure out from the top down how to reform this system. It has to be figured out from the bottom up through the marketplace. And to do that, you have to give the marketplace an alternative, sound currency to be able to generate a price structure that works, which is what we're going to discover very shortly we do not have. Interesting problem. You know? I've been doing this for a long time, and I never thought it would get to this. All right? I thought I'd miss out on watching it. But no. So I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. This should be fascinating to see how this plays out. Yes, sir.
I'm just curious whether you have any view with regard to the sort of little baby steps which a couple of states take, I believe Utah, perhaps Virginia as well, to perhaps protect themselves from federal government, give themselves the leeway to do what you suggested for themselves in the event that the U.S. dollar becomes so unstable that they need to protect sort of their own folks or their own economies.
Well, yeah, I know about these things because I've been involved in a lot of them going back for several years. New Hampshire to begin with, and then Montana. Virginia, we're trying to get them to, the Virginia legislature to come up with a commission to study this problem, primarily to educate the legislators. And most state legislators have never thought about this. They treat it as some kind of federal problem. It doesn't relate to them. But basically the idea is exactly what I said. The state adopts an alternative currency unit, which is actual silver, actual gold. I'd like to see that done on the electronic basis because that has already been tested out in the marketplace. Those systems are there, they work. You can funnel any kind of gold and silver into them. It doesn't have to be a particular kind of coinage, it can be bullion. And they're capable of working down to very small amounts. One of the private companies out there, goldmoney.com, founded by a fellow by the name of James Turk, whom I've known for a long time. They're down now to, I think, 1,000th of a gram of gold and 1,000th of a gram of silver that they'll use in transactions. Well, now you're making small change in gold. Right? And that was always the problem in the coinage